Hello everyone, I'm Lucy and I'm your ghostly guide through Disney history. And today we're taking a stroll through the attractions graveyard to pay our respects to the not-so-recently departed Geyser Mountain, who tried her best to make it, but was simply both in the wrong place at the wrong time. Our story begins with the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. The ride opened in July of 1994 and in the years since has become a beloved attraction. Towards the late 90s, an idea for an attraction using this exact ride system was coming to fruition. Instead of a long-abandoned relic of the late 1930s, Geyser Mountain would be themed to the Wild West, making a home in Frontierland. I've heard a couple of reasons cited for having the attraction in Disneyland. One was Disney was expecting DCA to be a smash hit, and so Disneyland would need a new ride in order to compete. And, if we want to be cynical, the new ride would have made families want to stay at the resort longer so they could enjoy the new park and then a new ride at the other park. Another reason that I've heard is that by then, both Fantasyland and Tomorrowland had had massive refurbishments, so the company was looking to give Frontierland a little more zhuzh. Geyser Mountain would have been located where Star Wars Galaxy Edge is now. Of course, back then it was still Big Thunder Ranch, and allegedly it would have also taken up the area where Cascade Peak, a remnant from Nature's Wonderland, stood, but we'll get to Cascade Peak in a few minutes. Guests would have entered the area, and after traipsing through the Frontierland landscape, they would have come across a cabin and barn of an old inventor. The yard would have been a mess of metal, inventions, and scraps, and inside the cabin would be covered in crystals, geodes, and blueprints for various machines. The focal point would have been a map of the area, most importantly showcasing a strong geyser. It also depicted a tunnel system in the area, and contained a note about conducting bridge repairs. It's a surprise tool that will help us later. Leaving the cabin, guests would see several deep holes in the ground, the result of machinery testing by the inventor. The queue would end at a barn where guests would get on the ride. The ride vehicle would have been a, quote, mining vehicle. According to Jim Hill, it would have looked like the mining vehicle from Atlantis the Lost Empire. I know that mental image is probably very confusing. I haven't been able to find concept art of the ride vehicle. My personal guess is that it would be more cart-like compared to whatever's going on with Tower of Terror. If you're not familiar with that ride system, the short of it is that there's a ride vehicle and then that locks into another vehicle in the drop tower shafts. It's not one piece. So the Geyser Mountain vehicle would do the exact same thing. And also, as a side note, if you're still a little confused, it's also what's going on in Rise of the Resistance for that brief drop. Anyways, our first scene would have been an homage to the famous rainbow paint pots from Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. There would have been a lot of colorful scenes in these dark caverns as we gradually traveled up Geyser Mountain. There would have been more tributes to Nature's Wonderland, but I haven't heard of any specifics. Knowing how beloved that ride was, it could honestly be any scene or element from it. At some point, riders would have noticed that their way back to the barn was blocked by rubble from a landslide. With nowhere else to go, they would have to use the old rickety bridge that would give OSHA inspectors a heart attack. This bridge in the heart of the mountain would start to buckle under the guests and break. We would go plummeting down, but the geyser would start to erupt and lift guests up. The force of the geyser would be so great that it even propels guests to the very top of the mountain to get a bird's-eye view of Frontierland before coming back down onto a solid piece of the mountain. The vehicle would continue its journey back to the barn and the ride would come to an end. I can't help but mourn Geyser Mountain. It sounds so fine. Perhaps it would have been a little traumatizing for me, considering it was set in a place very similar to where I grew up. I was afraid of geysers then, and I still am even now. However, like I alluded to in the beginning of the video, Geyser Mountain wouldn't make it. Cascade Peak was demolished in 1998 to start making progress on Geyser Mountain. However, I've heard conflicting reports on whether this is true or not. I've also heard it was demolished because it was a big feature that was rotting and unsound. Of course, this could have been a case of two birds with one stone, and Cascade Peak was demolished for both reasons, but I don't know. I've also heard that Cascade Peak was not demolished to make way for Geyser Mountain, but rather was destroyed in the hopes that it would lead to Geyser Mountain being greenlit. My assumption is as a replacement, but I haven't found any clarification on that. And like I mentioned earlier, Geyser Mountain may have been so that there was something done with that land. My skepticism isn't just stemming from conflicting reports, but also the location of Cascade Peak. While it's possible Geyser Mountain would have taken up that space as well, that whole area for one attraction seems very oddly large. Normally, I wouldn't bring this up, but because Cascade Peak was brought up in several articles about Geyser Mountain, no matter the truth of the matter, it's now entwined with Geyser Mountain. But anyway, something else also started in 1998, the construction for Disney's California Adventure. With construction costs being what they are, or what they were, Geyser Mountain had the brakes put on it. Construction costs for Geyser Mountain would have been expensive because the mountain portions of the ride would obviously be built at ground level and above, but the rest of the ride would have to be built underground, and that would make construction costs skyrocket. When California Adventure opened in 2001, it was not received well, to put it lightly. California Adventure starting her life in her flop era was not good news for the company, and so the decision was made to shelve Geyser Mountain. Had the ride been built, executives were worried it would draw traffic to Disneyland and not California Adventure. Instead, it was decided to bring a clone of Tower of Terror to DCA. However, this wasn't the end of Geyser Mountain. It was also considered for Disneyland Paris. I've heard it was either going to be located behind Phantom Manor and those geysers, or where the Chaparral Theater is. Imagineer Pat Burke was asked to come up with some concepts, and his version of the ride is more like a mining elevator sort of ride, with guests traveling in an elevator shaft to observe various underground caves. Whether the vehicles moved out from the shaft or not, I don't know. But regardless, the ride was planned to open in 1999 and then was postponed. But with that postponement came the opening of Paris' second park, Walt Disney Studios. And guess what? She also started as a flop. So once again, with the second park struggling, the decision was made to give it the Tower of Terror. It sounds a little silly, this happening twice, but to be fair, Tower of Terror is an amazing ride, and I don't mind Imagineers treating it like a band-aid. While the hope remains that someday, some park will pick up Geyser Mountain, with the popularity of Tower of Terror and her alternate selves, it makes the chances of seeing Geyser Mountain very, very small. Parts of her live on in other attractions, like the giant wheel on her side and the concept art that was used for Grizzly River Rapids. But ultimately, she just lives on in our hearts. Thank you everyone for watching. I've been wanting to do history videos on attractions since I started this channel, but things have only been able to line up now. I've covered most of the merch histories I've wanted to, so now I'm able to go on and branch out to ride histories. I'll see you next month for another ride history video, and until then, frightful farewells everyone!